Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we're going to scientifically dismantle the magic of the fashion industry. If you've ever looked at a runway show or even just a clothing store window and wondered where these ideas actually come from, well, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to look past all the glamour and the flashing cameras to understand the exact mechanics of how trends are born, how they live out their lifespan in our society, and ultimately, how they die. It's a really fascinating, highly structured journey.
Look at the clothes you're wearing right now. I know, it is incredibly tempting to think that fashion is purely spontaneous. Like a designer just wakes up one morning with a sudden burst of inspiration, or you just woke up and independently decided to buy that specific jacket. But we really need to shatter that illusion. What you wear is actually the result of a highly coordinated, meticulously planned sequence of events.
Here's our blueprint for today's explainer. First, predicting the future. Second, the pendulum swing. Third, the anatomy of a fashion cycle. And finally, we'll look at the exceptions to the rules. Section 1, Predicting the Future, the Art and Science of Fashion Forecasting. Okay, let's dive into this. Act 1 of our journey begins long before a piece of clothing ever hits a retail shelf. We're stepping into the hidden, high-stakes world of trend forecasting. You see, there is a real profession out there called a trend forecaster, and these specialists basically act as professional trend spotters. Their entire job is to capture the zeitgeist, which is a German word that means the spirit of the times. To do this, they travel constantly to global fashion capitals. We're talking London, Paris, Milan. But they aren't just looking at clothes. They are studying shifting patterns in human behavior, our lifestyles, and big global events. They're also out there scouting brand new developments in raw materials, like specific fibers and yarns. Then, they take all of this massive cultural data and compile it into these highly detailed trend forecast books. These books literally predict what the world will want to wear 6 to 18 months in advance. And the entire apparel industry relies on these coordinated predictions to decide exactly what to manufacture. Moving on to Section 2, the pendulum swing, how fashion moves to avoid stagnation. So, now that we know how trends are predicted, we need to understand how style moves on a macro level. To picture this, think of a giant clock's pendulum. The pendulum swing is a foundational concept in fashion studies. It describes this periodic movement of fashion that gathers momentum as it swings from one extremity completely over to another. And why does it do this? Simply put, to counteract human boredom and avoid design stagnation. You see, the human mind constantly seeks stimulation through novelty. When a particular style has been pushed to its absolute creative limit, the market gets totally saturated. There are just no more variations left to explore. At that exact moment, the pendulum has to reverse its direction. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact whiplash of that fashion pendulum. You can actually map this academic concept directly onto your own closet. In the 1960s, the market was absolutely saturated with fitted miniskirts. So where did the pendulum swing? All the way to the complete opposite side, ushering in those flowing maxi dresses. Think about denim too. When the seam rise of jeans gets incredibly low, think of that massive low-rise craze back in the early 2000s. The pendulum literally has nowhere else to go but back up, swinging completely over to the high-rise pants that dominated the later decades. Section 3, Anatomy of a Fashion Cycle, from runway to the discount rack. Let's zoom in now. We've seen the macro pendulum, but what happens on the micro level? How does a single, specific style actually live and die in our society? Well, it happens through the famous fashion bell curve. The acceptance and rejection of literally any trend follows a very specific curved path, and it's made up of 5 sequential phases: introduction, rise, peak, decline, and obsolescence. Let's walk through exactly what happens at each step. In Phase 1, the introduction, fashion innovators and leaders adopt a style very early. It's new, it's fresh, it's exciting. Then we hit Phase 2, the rise. This is when the style starts gaining much wider acceptance. Designers start to adapt it to make it a bit more accessible, the media heavily publicizes it, and everyday fashion followers begin to pick up the trend. Ask yourself right now, are you the person wearing the style in Phase 1, or are you generally jumping on board during Phase 2? Then we hit Phase 3, the peak. At this stage, the style is quite literally everywhere. It is widely worn by the vast majority of consumers, and you can find variations of it at every single price point, from super high-end boutiques all the way down to mass-market chains. But here is the grand irony of the fashion cycle. The exact moment a trend achieves maximum mass popularity, those fashion-conscious early adopters from Phase 1, they immediately discard it. For them, it's completely lost its exclusivity. And because those innovators have totally moved on, we enter Phase 4, decline. The style is now suffering from sheer overexposure. Retailers start noticing decreasing demand and immediately start slapping discount stickers and sales tags on the items. Finally, we reach phase 5, obsolescence. The style is universally rejected as outdated or passé. The product has entirely lost its edge, and it gets pushed out just to make way for a brand new trend to cure our collective boredom. Now, look at the math behind the magic here. Not all trends travel through those 5 phases at the exact same speed. Notice the distinct mathematical curves of the fad, standard, and classic cycles. Cycles vary wildly in their duration, their undulations, and their velocity, which basically means their speed of acceptance and rejection. Let's break those 3 graphs down. First is the fad cycle. Fads, like those neon fluorescent t-shirts or baggy anti-fit jeans, have a very sharp, incredibly steep curve. They explode into immense popularity overnight, but they die out just as quickly. Next is the standard trend cycle. This is a gradual start that sustains longer, forming that perfect normal bell curve we just walked through. But then we have the classic cycle. A classic is practically invincible. It reaches a steady plateau of popularity and then just stays there. Think of a perfectly crisp white shirt or a well-fitted pair of black trousers. They completely defy obsolescence. Section 4, exceptions to the rules, variations in the cycle. Let's move to and see how this builds. Because, of course, human society isn't perfectly mathematical. There are these brilliant exceptions and nuances that complicate our standard bell curve. The first big exception is the cycle within cycle. This happens when the industry really wants to capitalize on a massive ongoing trend. To keep the consumer hooked, they create multiple micro-variations, different little design interpretations that just rotate endlessly within that main cycle. The absolute best example of this is the denim jeans phenomenon. Jeans became incredibly popular during the California gold rush and essentially never left the macro cycle. They're a total staple. But to keep us buying more pairs, the industry relies heavily on cycles within the cycle. One year, the hot microcycle is acid wash. The next, it's bootleg. Then it's straight leg. Then enzyme wash. The main cycle stays perfectly alive through these constant, smaller reinventions. Our second exception is the interrupted cycle. Fashion doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Sometimes, massive outside forces violently disrupt a trend's natural lifespan, forcing manufacturers to prematurely halt the production of a specific style. This is almost always driven by major socioeconomic or political events. A profound historical example of this is the World War II disruption. When the war broke out, sweeping fabric shortages and massive economic restructuring completely halted the current fashion trends right in their tracks. The industry simply couldn't focus on frivolous design variations anymore. Society was instantly forced into the adoption of purely functional clothing. The reigning trends were interrupted literally overnight. Our final exception is the recurring cycle. And this basically proves that a truly good idea in fashion never really dies. A style will run its complete course through the 5 phases, fade all the way into obsolescence, and then, years or even decades later, it resurfaces. It just waits for the right cultural zeitgeist, and then designers bring it back to life through fresh reinterpretation. So, the crucial point here is how history continuously feeds the future. Notice the visual connection we have. On the left, we have historical abstract art, a famous painting by Piet Mondrian. And on the right, we see a direct, absolutely brilliant translation of those exact geometric shapes into an iconic high-fashion garment by Yves Saint Laurent in the 1960s. Now, that 1960s Yves Saint Laurent dress was a massive hit. And then, naturally, it faded away. But the cycle recurred. That exact style of bold, geometric color blocking surged back into massive global popularity during the spring and summer 2012 season, utilized by entirely new generations of designers. It perfectly illustrates how past art and past trends are the perpetual fuel for future fashion. We've covered a lot of ground today, dismantling the hidden mechanics of style. We've seen how forecasters actually predict the future, how the pendulum swings back and forth from mini to maxi, the 5 distinct phases a garment takes from the runway straight to the discount rack, and the fascinating exceptions to those rules. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. Next time you open your closet, look at your clothes through this brand new, structured lens. Are you holding on to a fleeting fad, an enduring classic, or a past trend that is just waiting for the pendulum to swing back? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.